Hello, BookTube. We are coming to the end of the first week of a BookTube event that is in its second year, a BookTube event that I am one of the hosts of, although you'd never know it from how neglectful I have been. New World is November, created by the Bookish Bryants to celebrate science fiction, specifically shorter works of science fiction, either short novels, fewer than 200 pages, or short stories themselves. And I meant to do New World's November video every day. Maybe 2 every day. I meant to flood the zone with New World's November videos, and I haven't done it. So I feel like a deadbeat dad. But I saw Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads and also Michael K. Vaughan made New World's November videos today. So I feel suitably bullied to get off my duff and make a New World's November video for this week. And we have a bunch of prompts and a whole bunch of scavenger hunts for you to find. Many more than I actually remember off the top of my head. But the prompt for the first week was terrestrial science fiction that takes place on Earth. And I have been reading a ton of science fiction for New World's November. I have felt a license to just go through and read as much of it as I can. But for the prompt and for the event, I thought I would concentrate on the latest issue of Analog magazine and just go through it and see, well, it's a full table of contents. How many of these stories will fit the prompt for the first week of New World's November? Turns out that quite a few of them do. And my hunting was not very good. It's not very good at all. First of all, the magazine itself confused me because half of the contents in here are so-called flash fiction, which I, of course, did not read. I'm not interested in a sketch of your story and your elevator pitch. I want your story, and I hope that's not a trend. I haven't actually checked to see if Analog is now filling half its contents every single issue. With flash fiction, I certainly hope not. It says horrible things about the attention span of the doom-scrolling generation, if so. Nevertheless, even if you skip the flash fiction, there was quite a bit of terrestrial fiction in this issue. Starting with the cover story, Sacred Cow, by Larry Niven and Stephen Barnes. Who knew that Larry Niven was still alive? I certainly didn't know that. This is a story about a guy named Gil Hamilton who works for ARM, Amalgamated Regional Militia, in 100 years in the future on Earth. And ARM, Amalgamated Regional Militia, has a variety of duties, but one of their main duties is mommy hunts. They enforce the new capital F fertility, capital L laws, the fertility laws that are invoked all throughout the story, but barely ever described. And Gil Hamilton is on thin ice with his bosses, who are weirdly antagonistic to him. One of his bosses is psychotic. The idea being, as is again sketchily told in the story, that psychotics have such a way of thinking outside the box that they can sometimes be useful. That's not what a psychotic is. That's not how they think. But there's a mystery at the heart of this story. There's a place in the story, a neighborhood in this futuristic world of 18 billion people called Gandhi's Cube. That's thousands and thousands and thousands of mostly Hindu residents, and Gil Hamilton is kept on thin ice and told to play by the rules and follow the book and every other cop cliche you can think of, because a genetically engineered cow that someone has sarcastically or otherwise named Indira has been murdered. And this cow had undergone a great deal of genetic modification. Its head was much bigger than it should be. Its brain was much more complex than it should be. And its eyes were sad, Gil Hamilton tells us over and over again, because its body was being used as a host organism to grow artificial human parts. So it had legs and arms growing out of it, and who knows what growing inside it. A miserable, miserable existence. And that cow is found not just dead, but killed. Bloodily killed. So there's an investigation. Gil Hamilton is part of the investigation. And he uncovers a lot. I don't want to spoil the story, but the story was not good on a number of levels. First of all, virtually no effort went into the world building at all. It's not just the fertility laws that are barely sketched in at all in the course of the story. If maybe the author's excuse or the editor's excuse would be that this is a fragment of some larger imaginative landscape, that's no excuse at all. The story has to work on its own. If it doesn't, then it fails. I don't care if it's part of War and Peace. But not only is the world here full of the slang, full of the reflexive concepts, full of all of it's the 20th century world. It doesn't feel like it's 100 years in the future at all. You can't just invoke that without invoking all the changes. Look at how different today feels from 1922, except in terms of the gigantic wealth disparity in America. It's the worlds are otherwise unrecognizable, and the world in Sacred Cow is intensely recognizable. All the cliches and idioms are the same, for Pete's sake. And also something that I noticed in this story. I don't take it wrong. I am not a prude. And I know that a lot of times when people say I'm not a prude, they then go on to be very prudish. I'm not a prude. Take my word for it. If you watch this channel, then you know that I'm not. But something I noticed in a lot of stories in this issue, and it's certainly true in this one, is just gratuitous vulgarity. Vulgarity that's not part of the character. It's not part of the narrative tone of the story as a whole. It's just sort of there, along with lazy idioms and cliches that an editor should have cleaned up. Should have said, well, okay, quick as lightning. I know that as a placeholder, that's just fine. But your job as an author is to get rid of those things. The reason that you don't use them when normal people do in a letter or an email is because you're an author and they're not. So you can't just leave all those cliches and idioms in your stuff. You have to get rid of them. The writing has to be better than that. And it's not at any point in this story. And also, there's a much deeper thing. Gil Hamilton is told by his superiors, follow this case until it bores you. They don't consider it all that important. Follow this case of a murdered cow until it bores you. And several times throughout the story, we are given the impression that it might have bored him, except for the footage that he saw of Indira in her stall, with her genetically engineered mind that put a human level of sadness in her eyes. The story reflects a few times, those eyes are what keeps Gil Hamilton on the case. You can guess my objection. Right? I'm sure that you can. Indira could have no eyes. Her eyes could have been harvested to an organ bank. Her plight would still be inhumane. Her plight would still elicit sympathy, or should. If you're saying that you have to see genetically enhanced intelligence and sorrow in someone's eyes before you acknowledge that they're suffering, think of all the monstrosities that you are allowing yourself to do. Do you walk into the ICU unit of a hospital, walk up to a comatose patient and just start carving scrimshaw in their flesh? No, you don't. They don't have those eyes, but you don't do it anyway. The whole thing just reeked of very quick left-handed exercise in a way that I didn't appreciate coming from one of the great science fiction magazines that's currently being published. Then I'll move on to a much more promising story. Amazing to say that any story in a table of contents would be more promising than something with Larry Niven's name on it. But I calls them like I sees them. This next one is by Aurélien Guyet. I no idea if I'm saying that correctly. I don't think I've ever read this author before. And it's called Kryptonic. It also takes place on an Earth in the future, in which our main character is a cop, an investigator named Ian Beck. He's a claims adjuster, really, for a gigantic metaverse-type tech organization called Metis that is so powerful that the police are required to work with Metis on investigations, specifically investigations of their most popular product, which is proxies. A chip, almost a very tough device that you can use to create a proxy self, an electronic proxy of yourself. And we get the impression in the course of the story opens with someone dead. A man is horribly dead, bleeding out his eyes, and a proxy chip is on the table in front of him, smashed to pieces. And the chip doesn't belong to him. It was stolen from someone. our claims adjuster and the cop that he teams up with go and find the someone, and they have a great deal of sympathy in their patter because in this storyline, people become very attached to their proxies, and they break the news to the guy whose proxy it was and want to understand what's going on. Now, Ian has a proxy of his own that was issued to him as just standard company procedure by Metis, but he doesn't use it. He doesn't like them. The cop that he works with has a proxy of her own that she uses all the time. And gradually in the course of the story, they come across hints that someone has developed a drug called Kryptonic, the name of the story, that is for proxies. It's an electronic drug that works for proxies. It doesn't work on humans. But the key is that when a human has a proxy and it's going out and about its business, they can then reintegrate it. They can welcome it back in to themselves. And one popular thing among humans who have proxies is for the proxy sort of mirrors the human. If the human gets drunk, the proxy gets drunk, and then when they welcome the proxy back in, when they reintegrate it, their own inebriation is doubled. Same thing with drug highs. And in the story, it seems like someone has come up with Kryptonic so that human users of proxies can get that high, a high that they literally can't experience biologically. It turns out in the course of the story that there's more to it than that, but it at least was competently done. The only problem that I had with it, and again, I'm not a prude, the only problem that I had with it is the same problem as with Sacred Cow, which is just loads and loads of lazy, gratuitous writing. Tons and tons of profanity, and also tons of lazy writing. Leaving aside the question of the profanity, just writing that is just the nearest thing the author had to grab to. Don't rework your prose at all. Just the nearest thing. For me, that really clangs, like there's a tinny clang when an author does that. Then we move on to the next story is by Holly Schofield. It's called Maximum Efficiency. And I didn't have that problem, at least with this story. This is, I think, on a technical level, the best story in the issue. And the only problem with it is that it's not a story. It's a premise. And unfortunately, I saw that a lot in this issue. And I don't know, I don't think Holly Schofield is not a 20-something ingenue. There ought to be nothing that I can teach her about writing fiction. And probably she was ecstatic for Analog to take her story. But nevertheless, this takes place in a world that is post-devastation, with a capital D. So a kind of a survivable post-apocalyptic world. The buildings are in ruins, but people still live, they still exist. And there is a coalition of humans. There's a governing body called a coalition that sort of runs the world. And they use a lot of AI and robots to enforce their will and to maintain their power. We don't learn that much about that power or about that will. The main focus of the story is a robot who is badly damaged, staggers out of the foliage, and encounters a woman who's living on her own in, the broken down ruins of an old suburb. And they tentatively get to know each other. She's distrustful, of course. And at the end of the story, the robot and the woman make a resolution that will affect the coalition. And scene. And that is not good enough. That is not a story. That's the beginning of a story. That's the launch point of a story. That's the premise. Nothing actually happens in Maximum Efficiency. Nothing actually happens except that getting to know each other, and that's not enough for a short story. A science fiction short story, that's not enough. So when I was finished with the story, I wrote, and then what happens? And then in parentheses, I wrote, and not in a good way, because there was way too much that I didn't know, that I wanted to know. Then we move on to another story that takes place on Earth, although a lot of it doesn't. There's quite a bit of it that doesn't. There's an intriguing thing that goes on here. This is by L.C. Herbert, and it's called Scene, and it takes place in the future. It's one of the most interesting stories in this issue. it takes place in the future in which unironically named device that's simply called the Centauri device. I have no idea if L.C. Herbert is a fan of M. John Harrison, or maybe just doesn't even know that M. John Harrison wrote a great science fiction novel called the Centauri device. Maybe L.C. Herbert doesn't even know that. I'd like to think that it's an homage instead of just science fiction writers continuing to be ignorant of their own genre. This device allows a human operator in a laboratory on Earth, again in the future Earth, but not so far in the future that it's unrecognizable. A human operator on Earth to see remotely on an exoplanet, dozens and dozens of light years away. There's an exoplanet in which life appears to have evolved on a world with very little sunlight and no atmosphere from thermo vents at the bottom of the oceans. And this little speck has shielding, it has shuttering so that it can't be seen, but it allows an operator in a lab back on Earth to watch the life forms in that ocean, which are called fish, F-I-S-C-H, because the star is Fisher or something or other. And so it seemed natural because they're eel-like beings with feather-like protuberances on their bodies, and they hunt in the perpetual darkness of the planet's oceans, and they have indentations on what appears to be their head. And the main scientist in this story, did I jot down her name? I don't think I did. I don't remember her. It was Carrie. Carrie was her name. I don't remember her last name. But she is trying to. She's observing these fish creatures on this far distant world that humans are never going to visit. She's observing these creatures because she has a theory that those are actually eyes. That the fish can actually see with those indentations rather than motion detecting sensors or something like that, as has been hypothesized by some of her colleagues. And she is watching one of these fish when there's a malfunction with the shutter of the Centauri device at the fish's end, and it shows a little blink of light to this alien being, which is hugely against the protocols on Earth. You are not allowed to display yourself in any way to these native animals, these native organisms of one kind or another. You're not allowed to do that, and Carrie does that. And that provides the internal tension of the story. The story is a mishmash of scientific invention and modern day holdovers. I think this is a story where at one point Carrie consults her wristwatch when she wouldn't, when only hipster douchebags consult their wristwatches today. She certainly wouldn't do it in 100 years or whenever the story is set. Also, she has a hand-me-down Tesla, a car, a Tesla that she got from her father and that needs lots and lots of maintenance. How's that for ironic? And the author had no way of knowing that Elon Musk would be in the news for strictly Lex Luthor reasons. The author had no way of knowing that, but nevertheless. And also, at one point in the story, we're told about the protocol for wearing face masks indoors. And that seems strange as well, that unless there's a future pandemic where that is all of a sudden a thing again. And I liked the invention of the story. I like the Centauri device. I like that whole idea of remote observing the creatures on exoplanets. The only complaint I have about it takes place on Earth, and it's well done, it's well executed. The only complaint that I had about the story is that at its climax, it seems like the author decides, well, enough of this. I need to have a whole bunch of stuff happen in the last page of the story, and that felt lopsided. That felt really lopsided. The story just takes off in an operatic new direction. 2/3 of the way through, 3/4 of the way through. The operatic new direction is interesting on its own, but it ended up feeling lopsided. If you're getting a gist here, there were no home runs in this issue, at least for the stories that fit the bill for the first week of New World's November. The ones that are set on Earth, there were no home runs. I may go through this for next week and do the extraterrestrial stories, or maybe I'll get Asimov's between now and then, and I'll do that, or both. But the last story that I want to talk about, who wrote this thing? Guy Stewart wrote this, called Dinosaur Veterinarian, where that opens with a group of people being attacked by killer chickens. they're attacked by mobs of killer chickens that kill people. They're not just inconveniencing tourists or specialists or a group of bird watchers at the beginning of the story that bite the farm. They're killing people, and the explanation, that the investigation in the story is why. What are they? And it's fairly well done. The author or the editors mentioned something that I think was more important than they wanted it to be. At the beginning of this had original artwork in the issue. To head it off here, yeah. Characters in this story previously appeared in Road Veterinarian in the 2019 Analog issue. Now, I must have read that because I've never missed an issue of Analog, but I don't remember it. There are some stories from Analog that I very much do remember. I don't remember that one. Off the top of my head, I don't. And I'm wondering if that's important, because this felt like not so much a sequel, but definitely in a continuity that I should be more aware of than I am. I think the author was doing his best not to have that be true. I credit him for his efforts, but there were times where I felt, okay, this seems like it's a cumulative payoff rather than a dramatic payoff. This seems like I should remember that first story in order to get the full amount out of this character's revelation, this particular later scene in the story, and I shouldn't have to do that. And I got that impression. Maybe I was just tired by then, but I don't think so. So I'm reading short stories for New Worlds November, and I'm reading them from the horse's mouth. I'm reading them from, one of the three major periodicals that does short stories in America today. And I will go through this for next week, but I'm hoping that I get Asimov's or the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in between now and then. The baby is yawning at my endless palavering. She's in a very, very good mood. We went out for a walk, and it was very warm. It's a very warm day today. November in New England, what are you going to do? And when we got back, she was panting and I was panting, and we calmed down and I let her relax. But the whole time that she was relaxing, I was surreptitiously preparing her BATH. And then when she was calmed down, I don't like to do that to her when she's still overheated and panting. She was calmed down, we had our bath. And she behaved wonderfully. Wonderfully. Once she realizes what's going to happen, she just resigns herself to it and doesn't fight, doesn't fuss, and it's just wonderful. It happens right away, and I can't help but think she feels better. And once she is, hi baby, and there's no hard feelings with the girls, with especially my Basset Hound Lucy. There was hard feelings for the rest of the day. Lucy would resent me when she had her bath, which had to take place in the bathtub, and which she fought the whole time because she thought I was trying to kill her. When we were done and I'd finished toweling her off to the best of my ability, she would then be resentful of me. Not until she got over it, but until she forgot why she was resentful, which didn't take long to do. Frida is not resentful in any way. She knows what it is, and she knows she's going to feel better when it's over. So it's virtually issue-free. But I'm going to continue with New Worlds November. In fact, I'm hoping that my next New Worlds November will not need to be flushed out of me by Greg and Michael guilt-tripping me. I'm hoping that I'll do it on my own. Well, we're going to wrap this up for now, but New Worlds November is barreling on. We are reading short science fiction all month. Feel free to join us. I will wrap this up, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.